My name is Ahmed Bukhash. I'm an architect. I've graduated from Wentworth Institute of Technology in Boston. I studied there for 5 years. And then I continued my education in Japan to do a Masters of Architecture. And since then, I established my own firm, which is called Ark Identity. And basically, during that time, I was also working with the developers. And I'm currently also balancing jobs between an authority as well. So I'm working in parallel with that as well. The way I categorize context-driven design is more related to postmodern architecture. So if you track a lot of the evolution of the architecture, which was by John R. Harris and partners, that was done in the old buildings within older, more modernist movements that followed from the lineage of Corbusier and so forth and Frank Lloyd Wright. So I'm basically, for me, I believe at that time that they developed such architecture work such as the original Trade Center, and the Dubai Municipality building, which was completed in 1979. So I believe that these kinds of architecture movements were very context-driven. They considered their surroundings. They had a special attention in terms of the climate and in terms of wind flow and so forth, which are the basic principles of architecture. So our firm, Ark Identity, is basically continuing that lineage. We kind of discard a lot of the things that were built in between that, because a lot of them we felt were not as context-driven as those original works. So we wanted to keep true to the original theories and the original concepts that were built. And funnily enough, when you do some research, you do also notice that the architects that built that work at that time, they were propagating them as future models that people should follow. But unfortunately, a lot of architects went more into the more international style of architecture. To achieve timeless architecture, you needed to be context-driven and not to follow trends, which again, I believe if you can get the residential typology right, you can adopt it to any type of other typology, such as office buildings and so forth, or cultural buildings. So if you get that principle right, which unfortunately we still haven't got it foolproof, you will notice that you get a lot of contrasts. So if you go to a typical residential area in Dubai, you'll find the very typical like cliche Greek, Roman kind of architecture. And right next to it is a very modern building. So that actually, both of them, in a way, they are following trends. So what we believe in Ark Identity is that the next stage of evolution will come when you take all these in terms of the modern architecture and you make it more context-driven. So for example, balconies, nobody uses them. You have a lot of glazing still on the outside. You do minimalist buildings, but if you go back to the original precedents of our traditional houses, which were built in the older Fahidi area or the previously known as the Bastakia area. So if you take the basic principles of how those were built, you will notice that a lot of them are very bland on the outside. So they're built on the perimeter of the plot and they're very bland. So, but on the inside, they're the total reverse. So if you break it down to very simple terms, all the extravagance and the elegance is on the inside of the house rather from the outside. So we follow similar principles in Ark Identity. We try to make it simplistic. We try to follow the real kind of a more contextual-driven architecture, very modern on the inside, but also very humble and simplistic on the outside. And we believe that is the direction that the architecture should be headed towards, a more timeless, contextual-driven. I believe that a lot of the theoretical part of it, the documentation part of it is important. However, what speaks loudly is always action in Dubai, and master developers, they are the basic propagating the trends and the architecture, whether timeless or non-timeless. So in order for you to make a strong prototype, you have to take it upon yourself to take that risk, implement it, make it executed in your own way in terms of the theories that you've learned outside, implementing it and showcase it so that other master developers can learn from that, implement it maybe on a more localized manner, maybe on a master plot rather than a whole city, and see how the people respond to it and take the feedback of the people. I think that's something that can be really really utilized, because I feel that people have a lot to say, whether expat or locals, but that kind of feedback is not being captured. So a lot of that is basically, oh, one project is being perceived well by a certain, maybe it's increasing tourists, but a lot of it has to do with the people who are living here the whole time and how they view things, whether older buildings which were demolished for new developments versus retaining them, retrofitting them, or learning from them to develop a new style of architecture or a more context-driven architecture. The original trade center was John R. Harrison Partners, and I still believe that their architecture, regardless, they're still relevant till now. And the Dubai Municipality building, which was also done by a civic design studio. And at that time, there was a Japanese architect called Kazuyuki Matsushita, who designed that building. And that was in collaboration with Pacific Consultants. So you'll see both names appearing. So for me, those are kind of the things that I look to, whether to develop a high-rise typology or a low-rise typology. And in terms of the residential, I mean, there's a lot of new kind of breed of architects, not only ours, but also other architects that are recently graduated, and they kind of had to leave the country and come back to it in order to appreciate the beauty of it. So I think they are doing great works in terms of propagating the whole local residential context-driven architecture.